In this behind-the-scenes look at how the BBC's Panorama programme gathers and puts together its stories, our cameras follow the actions of reporter John Sweeney and reveal a side of the BBC that is both dark and disturbing.
My name's John Sweeney and I work for the BBC. As a BBC reporter, I will say that my organisation is at times hideously hidebound with stupid bureaucracy. There are people there who claim salaries who frankly are morons.
No, Timmy, you stop! No, listen to me! You were not there at the beginning of that interview!
I reacted under pressure to your attempt to brainwash me.
If the BBC casts its blessing on something, it is blessed. And if it doesn't, it is damned.
And that's something that does cause me worry, and that's where, of course, the media is very powerful.
At the same time, with this power comes responsibility, and that responsibility is seriously lacking. Where? In the BBC.
They have dumbed down their best shows, so they've dumbed them out of all recognition.
The story begins in London, 1st of March 2007. An email from the BBC's John Sweeney arrives at the Church of Scientology, requesting a meeting and informing them that they are the subject of his next assignment. Willing to grant full access to all of their churches and activities, 2 senior Scientology executives fly from church headquarters in Los Angeles to meet with Panorama reporter John Sweeney and his producer Sarah Mole to talk about their plans. They convene at St. Hill Manor, once the home of Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, and now the site of the Scientology College in England. Executives begin briefing Sweeney and Mole and offer help in the development of Panorama's story.
I could take you to Narcan on Arrowhead, I could take you to Clearwater, I could take you to Los Angeles, to our major churches there.
Knowing the best way to evaluate any group is through its activities, church executives insist that Sweeney and Mole join them again in London the next day for a more extensive briefing on its churches and social betterment programs.
All right, good. Well, we should dive into it. We've got a full agenda today. Yeah.
Sweeney and Mole hear about the nearly 100,000 registered Scientology volunteer ministers who have traveled to 115 nations delivering aid to disaster victims.
So that's the volunteer ministers. So now we're going into human rights.
They see the church's international human rights campaigns, including a series of educational public service announcements. They're shown the way to happiness, a moral code written by L. Ron Hubbard with 70 million copies in distribution.
This is the Way to Happiness headquarters. The foundation operates out of there.
It's one of many places church executives invite Panorama to tour.
Now we're going to jump into the educational programs like learning literacy. It's called Applied Scholastics.
They see church-sponsored educational programs that provide effective learning tools to educators and students worldwide. And a drug prevention campaign supplying educational materials and solutions to countries in desperate need of help. They see the scope of Scientology in major cities around the world, including many newly opened churches. Armed with books, brochures, and DVDs, Sweeney and Mole promise to send an email detailing what they would like to cover. No email arrives, but 3 days later, the team from the BBC shows up a continent away. Clearwater, Florida, home to Scientology's largest church. On this evening, Scientologists gather in celebration of the birthday of the religion's founder, L. Ron Hubbard. John Sweeney had been advised that this is an internationally broadcast event that could not be filmed by a random camera crew. With the celebration already underway, Sweeney appears, unannounced, with a request he knows cannot be accommodated. He demands entry to interview the leader of the religion, who he also knows is at that moment inside speaking to a packed auditorium and a worldwide satellite audience.
He was very insistent on having to speak to church leaders and interview church leaders right in the middle of an event that, is an international event.
I kept on trying to at least politely explain to him that, if you contact the right people, and obviously you can't get in tonight, but I'm sure if you talk to the appropriate person at the church, they can arrange whatever you want to do. If you want a tour or whatever, I'm sure it can be arranged. And suddenly he's asking me all these questions about Scientology, and some of them were just ridiculously offensive.
Knowing full well in advance that he would be turned away, John Sweeney had just staged the first of his tabloid stunts. Recognizing that Sweeney would use this created incident to claim a lack of cooperation, the next morning church executives renew their attempt to invite him for a tour. Sweeney promises to call back. But later that day, he and his crew appear across the street from a church facility to film an interview with two former Scientologists who had attempted to extort money from the church. This is not the first time a Panorama reporter had sought out ex-members for interviews maligning the church. In 1987, Panorama aired a story detailing the unsubstantiated allegations of a handful of detractors who had filed a lawsuit against the church for $1 billion. Shortly thereafter, the accusations were disproved, the witnesses discredited, and the lawsuit thrown out of court, with these words from the judge: "This is the most egregious defiance of the law and the court's order that I've ever heard. Each action is dismissed." Not only did Panorama never correct their 1987 story, they justified their dissemination of fraudulent allegations by falsely claiming that the church had never given them access. Church executives reiterate their offer to give Sweeney and the BBC team free access through any one of the 40 church buildings in Clearwater and to meet any of the thousands of Scientologists from all over the world at what is known as the Mecca of Scientology. But despite having spent thousands of pounds flying a three-man crew to Florida, the Panorama team never sets foot inside a church building and doesn't interview a single Scientologist. With this in mind, church executives go to see Sweeney at his hotel. They wait for him in the lobby until he finally shows up at midnight.
We're offering you open access to the church to see it, to come in and film it. Okay. And you don't show up to do it. You fly all the way from England and don't do that. Right. Okay. How is that?
But even in the face of this, instead, Sweeney positions his cameras on the roof of a nearby parking garage to interview one Sean Lonsdale. A convicted drug user and sex offender, he has never been a Scientologist, nor has he been inside a Scientology church. To locals, he is infamous for standing on a nearby street corner harassing church members, for reasons no one can explain.
Some sexual indecency offence. You freely admit to that? Yes, absolutely. Does that, in your view, disqualify... And have in major newspapers as well. Right. Does that disqualify you from observing, analysing, testing the claims of the Church of Scientology?
I don't think so.
If we're swapping criminal convictions, I've got one for criminal libel.